I just want to introduce our overall framework here and explain just sort of how we try to accomplish the goals that we're talking about. And so this is our latest rendition of this process, which is really a process divided into four phases. And I'll start with the big picture goal of the process, and then I'll break it down into a little bit what we do in each phase and why four phases and all of that. But the fundamental goal was that I focused years of training and work on showing people how to write the proposal itself for a reviewer so that a reviewer could digest it, respond well, and want to support it. So we were very focused. I was very focused on things like the specific aims pages and the rest of the proposal text. How do you make that digestible? And of course, you've read my book, so that was all about that same thing. Like, what is the reviewer thinking? How are they responding? And so I was very much living in this land of what I now call performance land, which is putting on a show for the reader. And it's still important. We've still got to put on a show for the reader. But if you think about any area of life where you do have to put on a show for somebody, whether it's art or a movie or TV or whatever, that the person who's on the receiving end wants substance. They don't want just showmanship, showwomanship. They don't want just that. They want some kind of substance behind that. And that's where I kept running into problems in getting the substance right that was behind that show that we're presenting. And so with clients, we would often iterate endless iterations, not quite endless, but close, of specific aims pages, for example. And we would often be having discussions about the actual science itself, which would seem kind of tangential. But then when we had the right discussion, sometimes suddenly everything would click and then the aims page would come together. And I kind of, after years of doing that, I got really tired of going at this tangentially, at this underlying content tangentially, and wanted to do that directly rather than just in the sense of we're writing an aims page and we're presenting something to a reviewer, and also we got to do some good science. No, what I finally landed on is we have to do the good science first and then tell the nice story for the reviewer. And what I mean by good science is science that is both exciting for you as the applicant and science that is going to be exciting for the right audience, the right funder, and that when they understand it, they're also going to be excited and say, wow, we want to support that if we can. So separating those two things has such tremendous benefits. I just can't believe that I didn't see it earlier. There are several, I'll name one of the big ones is that when we separate performance phase out to just the final step, and we're not worried about how our wording, our writing sounds for some reader or some reviewer in any of the earlier phases of this, it frees us to just explore and play and work with the ideas and not worry about getting it sounding right. So we can get the ideas to a point where they're really clear and compelling and interesting, and then we can start worrying about the reviewer. So that's why this is diagrammed in the way it is, with an upward slope here and a downward slope here, is that in this upward slope, we're trying to get to the point that we are truly clear on that idea. And we just call it the big idea. I adopted that from somebody else in a whole different domain. But I felt like it really worked here in grant writing. This idea of a big idea that is central to the grant proposal that covers essentially those core elements that I talked about in the book, the why, the what, and the how, but does it at a much deeper and more substantial level than just the level of writing for somebody. So we have specific frameworks for expressing the big idea now, and a lot of AI support for doing that. For internally, we'll use that, and then you're welcome to use that as well if you want. You don't have to. But the big idea is where we land on, here's the core of this science, and here's why we think that we're excited about it, and here's why we think the funders are going to be excited about it. And then on this downward slope, once we've accomplished, I think this is actually the hardest part for nearly everybody, because it's not just techniques and methodologies and data production, which we're all trained in as PhDs and MDs. It is actually coming up with that conceptual model that when people look at it, they're like, wow, that's cool. That's interesting. We want to see if that works. So this is actually the hard work quite often. And then it gets a little bit easier, because once we have that pinned down, then we can do these two phases where we are thinking about the reviewer and how we present it to the reviewer. So it has this big benefit of taking the performance anxiety and putting it towards the end, and of really focusing on what is the best science we can present to them. And sometimes we don't, maybe if your idea is too big in terms of your big idea, sometimes we have discussions about then how can we take one piece of that idea that is of a nice size that they're willing and ready to accept, and then sort of the rest is in the background, but you're not talking openly about the rest of it because maybe it's too big, too ambitious, or whatever. So we have lots of conversations about that. So we do that through the preparation phase and the play phase to get to our big idea. Preparation, just really laying the groundwork, understanding the terrain, where we're going. We put it as the sandbox, the strategy and timing, your magic powers, and your funder fit are the main things. And our output of this phase is a concrete strategy statement. So I want to say something about what we mean by inputs and outputs, because what I've realized is more and more as we do this, of treating it like almost like a factory process, although it involves art, it involves creativity, so it's not a factory process in the way that we're just going to stamp out widgets. But it is very helpful to emulate a factory process in the sense of, from each phase, knowing exactly what we're going for, where we're starting, and what we're going for, so we can easily test, are we there yet? Or do we need more in this phase? And so the output of this is a strategy statement. Then once we have that clear strategy statement that says, this is the overall domain, this is what we're doing, and since you have an already reviewed grant, usually this preparation phase goes faster unless we get partway into it. And then it's like, maybe I could do something more interesting with this. And then sometimes you decide to change, and then that can take a bit more time in preparation. Once we're really clear on the terrain, then we go into this play phase. And in play phase, we start with, well, the inputs are listed as curiosity, conversational exploration, imagination, and intuition. And of course, the strategy statement that we have from the previous phase. And we work with these things and have lots of discussions. And that leads us to an output of the scientific model is, for me, the number one thing that we're going for here. And we have a whole set of examples, and we'll talk about what those look like, and how you can emulate famous scientific models in both grant proposals, but also bigger things like relativity and so on. How to turn that model into a promise for your field, and then how to enumerate the how related to the model. And then once we have this, we have the core of the proposal. And I think, honestly, for a lot of people, that would be enough and they could take that and run with it. But most people like us to talk a little bit about the reviewers and how we structure things for reviewers. So then we take that big idea, that output, and we work on really understanding where the reviewers are at mentally. What are they thinking? What are their mental frames, and what mental frames do they need to have to be excited about our big idea? And what are their potential defenses that we might trigger if we present things in the wrong way or say, use the wrong word somewhere. So we really map that out in this planning phase and actually map out the backbone of our story that is designed to create more reviewer excitement about our idea and avoid the landmines. So that's what that phase does. And then finally, we get into what all my teachings for all of those years were about, which is now how do we take that and turn it into a written document that the reviewers will hopefully respond well to. And by the time we get to this, it's so much easier than most people are used to. Like we we just had one client who's basically finished or finishing up with this process for a submission soon. And he had insisted that he was going to need more feedback, more support, more phone calls to as we iterated through this. But he just got to a point where it clicked, and we did need a little bit of iteration and feedback. But then he's like, "Yeah, I've got this." It's more, I've been using the word humane recently. It's more humane on the reviewer because you're producing something that's better and clearer for them. And it's more humane for you as the applicant because it's not this last minute guessing, rushing, trying to rush things out the door and see if they'll stick and then getting rejected. I mean, I'm not saying we can completely avoid rejection. That still can happen. But hopefully in the process, we are more humane and we're getting closer and closer to that funding.
Yeah, really.
And I do want to say one thing about just in terms of a proposal, whatever you choose to take through this process, while we will do our best job to help you with that proposal, to make that a solid proposal, our intention isn't to try to make that the one that gets funded on the first time you try this. I mean, it's great when that happens, and that does happen, but that's not our goal because I think that if we get too much into that of trying to make like this perfect proposal, then we can bypass the real goal, which is to help you learn what it takes to produce this great
Mhm.
proposal and using that proposal as an example. So that is our real goal for you in this process is yes, we're taking a live proposal through this, but really our goal is to help you learn in each one of these phases what is so essential to know to really make this work.
Mhm.
And Louisa, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, our bottom line objective is that deeper learning for you of a process that you can then keep using on your own as you move forward, and also for you to really enjoy this. One of the phases that we'll go through is called play, but I think you'll find that each phase can be kind of fun in its own way. And more than one client recently has said that they never thought that, grant writing would be fun, but it actually can be with this process. And the reviewers feel that, I think, in the final product, and it makes your work stand out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think especially in the world today, everybody needs a little bit of fun and joy. And, so if you can show up with a proposal that is just a little bit lighter and more interesting, it stands out.
Mhm.
It really does. So I want to say a couple more things about this process before I hand things over to Louisa. Thing number one actually has to do with the handoff. So one of the things that has allowed me to expand some beyond what I could just do myself, since my time is so limited, is bringing in others to help take people through this process. And that's what originally motivated me to make this into a process in the first place was like, oh, I need a repeatable process that somebody else can take clients through. So it's not just me using my own intuition and experience all the time. But what we've found is it's not only beneficial, to have somebody else do it, but actually having somebody like Louisa who's not versed in the science, who doesn't have that immediate understanding of some of these fields, is actually a good thing. It's beneficial for the client. I think clients are actually doing better by having somebody like Louisa who is curious and scientifically literate enough to be able to ask good questions, but not an expert in any of these fields, so that she can ask questions. And oftentimes it is in the asking of seemingly naive questions that a lot of good stuff comes out, especially in the
Yeah.
play phase, but all the way through this process.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited that it's kind of a win-win for all, that we have somebody awesome like Louisa that can take you through this process, ask a lot of good questions, help guide you through, and who has the backstop of the frameworks. And then I'm there to review things in the background and help. And we actually have several other people, clients, who've gone through this process several times and who are also acting as they help out as coaches, just part-time. They're still full-time faculty members. So the other thing is that I've had another figure in the past, but I just want to put this into context, that this is all about the grant writing process. But often in working on this grant writing process, it's very frequent that what we would call mindset issues can come up, or you could call it mental frameworks that are maybe not compatible with success in the way you might want, that are sort of subconsciously adopted. We all have these. We're all trained to view and relate to the world in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just that needs to change and improve in order to get better results and move forward on things like this grant writing. So we may have some discussions about what we call mindset during this, but also in the bigger picture, we have other programs that, if that's something that calls to you, if mindset and or leadership, how do I, once I have funding, how do I actually build the team and make it an awesome, highly functional team? And sometimes people do come back and do this process multiple times because they love us so much. So that's also always a possibility. But our goal is to spend about 6 months going through this process the first time. Many people can make it through, but not everybody does make it through in 6 months, because sometimes when we start digging in, for example, in play phase, digging in and trying to develop that model, you might have competing models, and it might take a lot of thinking and a lot of discussions to actually nail it down. And we could spend 4 months or more here, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So we try not to make it a fixed schedule, but we do, if we're coming up within about 2 months of that 6 month endpoint of our official term, then we'll have a conversation with you about it and look at where we're at and say, are we going to finish at the rate we're going or not?